Mama,
Hello and welcome to Chats, a television podcast, Season 8B, RootsChatz. My name is Alan, and I'm joined as always by Magellan.
Hey, what's up?
Hello. Welcome to the podcast, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing just lovely. I'm doing just lovely. How are you doing?
Good. I don't know. How do we make these sound natural? Because the last one I was like, hello, my son. And you were like, hello, father. And it's like, how do we just talk to each other?
Oh, that's very funny.
Classic.
You should keep that in.
You should keep that in. Don't edit that out of the podcast. No, truthfully, if people, because the way that we start Skype calls, like before we're on podcast, is not conducive to good podcast because it's more like, probably like 90 seconds of silence before one of us decides to stop being an asshole and is like, hey.
That's good.
It's true. Also, it's true.
Oh boy, you're too much.
Okay. Oh god, the Magellan soundboard is acting up again. So sorry. Let me hit it real quick.
Well, this was great. It was great catching up with you. I'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Rebooting Magellan soundboard 1.0 edition.
Bye-bye.
No, sincerely though, I am doing well. I had a headache today because it's the first day in a while that I haven't had any coffee.
Good.
And I was like, why does my head hurt so much? And then it suddenly dawned on me, and I was like, oh. So I'm drinking a lot of water to counter that.
I have had very little coffee since we've been, inside, and I had coffee like, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago or last week or something, and then I had a very productive afternoon, and I was like, wow, today was great. I wonder what. Oh, right.
Oh, cheat codes.
It was when I drank the magical bean juice.
Mm-hmm. The bitter bean juice.
The bitter devil's bean.
That's what they call it, man. No, coffee is fantastic. I've been drinking mine black also because I'm trying to just like, just minimalist. My diet now is called minimalist, and if I eat bread, I only eat the crust. What else you got
there? Okay, crust, black coffee,
1 egg raw directly to my mouth. Slurp. Oh, you could eat a raw egg, especially.
This is all mixed together in one concoction.
Yep, and then you blend it.
Yeah.
Ew, bread, black coffee, and an egg would be a special hell. No, that you could, especially in other countries where salmonella is not as big of an issue, you can totally just eat raw eggs.
So Rocky did.
That's it. That is what Rocky did, and look what happened to him.
He's beefy.
I think he died. Actually, no, because Schwarzenegger. What's the guy? Who's the Rocky guy?
Sylvester Stallone.
Sylvester Stallone's still alive, so if they ever make another movie, maybe, I don't know if he died in the movies. I haven't watched the new ones. I know that they're focused on Creed now, but that's neither here nor there.
Doesn't he train Creed? Isn't he Creed's trainer?
No, someone else trains Creed, I think.
Isn't it the son? It's Creed's son.
Oh, that's what Creed is about?
I think so.
We should watch. What if we watched one movie? John and Alan watch one movie challenge. You can make one accurate reference. Isn't Aliens the one with the thing that comes out of the tummy?
Yeah.
Time travel? No. We're going to be doing a bit of time traveling today on RootsChatz as we discuss episodes 3 and 4 of Roots: The Next Generations. So let's get right into it.
Okay.
The first one that we watched was Roots: The Next Generations Part 3. Which is a teleplay by Ernest Kinoy, and it was directed by John Erman, and it aired February 20th, 1979. Magellan, could you tell me what happened in Roots: The Next Generations Part 3, please?
Will and Cynthia Palmer's daughter Bertha is off to Lane College, the first in the family to do so. There she meets Simon Haley, a fellow student who's working his way through school. She asks him out to the school picnic more as a joke than anything else, but they soon become close. At the end of the year, she describes him to her parents as a particular dear friend, which worries her father. When Simon gets home, he learns that his father needs him to help him out on the farm, and that there's no money for his tuition. His mother has her own ideas. Intent on returning to school, he gets a job as a Pullman porter, where he meets someone who changes his life. Congressman Andy Warner is off to Washington, and there's also a new president, Woodrow Wilson. Yay. Andy's not pleased with Earl Crowther when Earl Crowther starts a local chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, and they burn a cross without his permission. The Klan burns out Mr. Goldstein, the Jewish tailor, burns his business. Simon misses his graduation when he enlists in the army.
Pretty busy freaking episode, if you ask me.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot to dissect and pick apart there. I don't know. Where do you want to start?
I think Bertha and Simon is the emotional center of this episode that I found the most engaging. We've got, we talked about historically black colleges in the previous episode, and now we spend a little bit of time at Lane College. There was actually a scene, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but like when they're at the dinner, when she first asks him into the dance, where I was like, is this like it kind of like has the vibe of a boarding school. But then like when they're in class, they're learning the quadratic equation. So I'm like, what academic level would you map that to today? Because what you learn in college and what you learn in high school is very different than what it was, obviously, in the early 20th century now. But I thought that was interesting, especially with you as an educator. Not that you're a math teacher, but just like, what are the kids learning, and what is their learning environment like in this like really important time of their life, which is college. Because I liked that. I liked just the vibe of like, oh, we're in school now and we're learning, like we have writers that we know and can quote really well. The thing that kind of enamors Bertha to Simon early on is that he's a really big fan of W.E.B. Du Bois. He gives her, I think her mom gives her a book by him, actually. And then she's reading his stuff. He's talking about him and the difference between him and Booker T. Washington. And it's like, these are all people who have grown up with like black thought leaders and like writers who have like given them ideas to base their lives on that are besides just like advancement and survival, but also that stuff. And in addition, like education and art and creation of different things. So it's a really interesting time in American history.
Yeah, it's a moment in African American history that I think is often overlooked, because people know about slavery, they know about the civil rights movement, but I don't think people to the same extent know about the intervening decades where there was quite a lot of figuring out that was done of really, I think what we see across both these episodes is the question of like, is there any institution in which African American people can like procure dignity, like, and respect from white people? Like, they have an inherent dignity that white people are not recognizing. And is there any institution or any sort of like label or accolade that they can achieve in order for that dignity to be recognized? And I think that's a big part of the second episode we watched this week. Yes. When we talk about like military service. So we'll come back to it. But this first episode, really the kind of like bigger contextual thing that it's asking about and thinking about is this matter of education, and sort of like, what is the purpose of getting an education? And I've always found the sort of Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois dichotomy interesting. I think there was another RootsChatz episode where I talked about them, but I can't remember.
Yeah, you've name dropped them for sure.
But essentially, Booker T. Washington sort of rises to prominence in like the late 1800s, 1870s or 80s, somewhere around there. I can't remember. And his philosophy is best represented in the show, I think, by Will Palmer, as the sort of like, do your work, learn your trade, do it well, work within the society the way that it is. And the way that Simon Haley expresses it is basically like, this is a very long struggle that African American people are in. And so like agitating for, things like an amendment that says we have the right to vote or whatever, to someone like Booker T. Washington, it's like, okay, well, look at what happened after Reconstruction. Look at how those civil liberties were overturned just as easily as they were established. Those things are kind of impermanent and you can't rely on them. But what you can rely on is like, I'm Will Palmer and I have a lumber business.
Nobody can take that from you.
Right. That's the sort of Booker T. Washington idea. And so his, I think, approach to education is placing value on vocational education. And
which is part of what leads Simon to pursue agricultural college as well.
Right. And that's also expressed by like their old math teacher who's like, I used to march uphill both ways in the snow or whatever to go to night.
I think he says that Booker T, he used to teach, he was taught by him, which is like, the timeline is interesting there because it's like, that's not even a generation ago. I know him. He's a cool dude.
Yeah. And it, it's a really, not to make too much light of it, but it's a really interesting anecdote to think about, like just how difficult it was to get an education and the things that one needed to do in order to do that. But yeah, that's the Booker T. Washington ethos. And Simon Haley's like really bought into Booker T. Washington, which I think is interesting because then Bertha gives him the Souls of Black Folk, which Miss Cassie was like, hey, this guy I went to school with published a book. You should check it out. It's like, it's just some guy, W.E.B. Du Bois. I don't know.
Whatever.
He was like a year below me or something, but the book might be good. But Du Bois hated Booker T. Washington. Hated
really?
him.
Like actively?
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, I don't know that he hated him as a person, but he despised
their ideology's class
ideology and what he represented. Because to Du Bois, the way he saw it is sort of like, okay, if you're going to take this Booker T. Washington approach of like, keep your head down, do your work, be polite to the white people, you're just doing what they want you to do. And Du Bois was I guess he was a Marxist. He was some kind of leftist. I think he was a Marxist. And so he certainly would have been skeptical of the very kind of capitalist underpinnings of Booker T. Washington's ideology, because it's essentially a rags to riches kind of approach. The sort of like, work hard and you're going to do great.
Right. So
to Du Bois, it's like, that's bullshit. That is essentially being complacent in white supremacy. We can't allow for that sort of thing. So Du Bois helps to co-found the NAACP. He's pushing for civil rights, for legal action. And to him, the end or the purpose of education is the creation of what he calls the talented 10th. And they name drop that phrase in one of the episodes. I think Bertha says it to Simon Haley, like, you're going to be one of the talented 10th. Mm-hmm. And Du Bois's theory of change is basically like, okay, what we need to do is create a sort of black intelligentsia, essentially, like really well-educated African-American people who can be the politicians and the professors and the authors and the great minds to sort of lead African-American people and make change from the top. And also to him, it's like, maybe I just want to like learn Greek. Maybe that's like something I want to do.
Yeah,
that's satisfying to me. And that's also an end unto itself. Like a person who generations prior to you weren't allowed to read. And now you can, be an expert in all the great works of literature or whatever. There's a sort of like victory and pride in that.
In my brief Googling, by the way, at least the Wikipedia page for W.E.B. Du Bois does refer to him as a socialist, so gang. But yeah, it is like you talk about Will Palmer reflecting that. I think there is a scene in the third episode as well where he's reading the news and they're talking about socialists, and you just see him become the like old dad, ignorant person who's like, why do these socialists want to take away all our hard work, and what they're gonna, doing all of the arguments against socialism, just dropping all of that. And it's like, wow, Will Palmer has like a surprisingly narrow worldview, and in part because his fight was not like going out there and educating himself on the outside world. His fight was like starting a business and becoming self-enterprising. So he kind of like built his house and laid in it for a while.
And it worked for him, right?
Exactly.
He provided for his family and kept them alive, and he did what he wanted to do.
Yeah, it's why I'm so glad that we actually decided to go through and watch Next Generations, because there was obviously a lot of wonderful African American writers in the 18th century, I'm sure, but like now that literacy became more common and like we're now generations past that, there's already this like amazing wealth of African American literature and social critique coming from these writers that like the characters in the show can reference, and Simon Haley can straight up say like, I want to base my life on this, like I want to follow these ideals into my adult life and train and teach my kids this.
Yeah, Du Bois is writing histories of Reconstruction, and he's got a newspaper, and all that stuff is going on.
And people are growing up and like advancing in society too. I mean, before we actually get to the college stuff, technically there's this short but kind of I think satisfying scene, honestly, where we have cars now. There's a guy driving a car really quickly, and he almost runs over Colonel Warner, who's very old now. And Colonel Warner like jumps out of the way and panics, and then just like passes out. And seems like he's just going to die. The man is very old. He was old like 15 years ago. Now he's very old. And a doctor comes up to him and is like, I can help you. And I believe it's Crowther who's like, get away from him, because the doctor is well, we learn later is mixed race, but he's like, oh, he's a, N-word, blah, blah, all these nasty things. Get away from him. Don't touch him. We're going to take him to the white doctor. The guy's like, I know how to treat him. He's having a heart attack or something. If you don't treat him right now, he's not going to make it. And you're like, damn, that's really sad and straightforward and like right down the line. And then they just have to gut you with one little line where he's like, that's the closest I've ever been to my grandfather. Plot twist, that doctor was the grandchild of Colonel Warner. He's Jimmy Carrey's son. Fuck.
I don't know. That was one of those moments where it's like,
it's very silly.
Come on.
Yeah.
But like, it is, it's poetic justice in a way.
Yeah. It's so clean though. It's so like, I was just right there.
Yeah, it's too clean. And then his dad is like, yeah, you missed out, and so did he, or he missed out and so did you, or something like that.
Yeah, and then he
goes
cries.
off and cries.
Yeah, that's fine. The show has a lot more nuance than scenes like that, but every once in a while they just want to be like, did you get it? And that's, I think, more to connect this episode to the previous one than it is to like teach us something, right?
Well, it's also one of many examples across both of these episodes where you see white people really doggedly trying to hold on to racism, and increasingly there being very obvious evidence to them that like, hey, this pseudoscience that you made yourself believe about how white people were just superior to African American people during the time of slavery, it's bullshit. Here's this guy who's a doctor and is black, and so you see racism just becoming like, well, but no, I'm racist though.
Yeah,
that's what I'm doing.
Earl Crowther is my least favorite of the characters in this section of the story, obviously because he's a horrible white supremacist piece of shit KKK member, but also like his performance is just back to that version of white people that I don't think are that valuable to show us in this series, of like the evil white man. I mean, he literally is talking to Andy Warner later, being like, "But we're gonna keep doing KKK rallies, right? Like, we're gonna do it." He's like, "Yeah, I guess." He's like, "No, but like, we're gonna do it, right?" And it's just like he's so there's no ambiguity about it. And while I absolutely agree, I know for a fact that people did and do exist like that. It's just like, do we need another character like that? Or like when the rest of the story is so subtle and like nuanced as time has evolved?
Yeah, you just want to make sure you have every shade of white supremacist.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, because it's all there.
Yeah. Just briefly on the KKK stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a period of time where the KKK is experiencing a resurgence in membership.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had their sort of first surge during Reconstruction, and then the white supremacy is firmly established after that. And then in the 10s and the 20s, the KKK reaches, I think, its apex in terms of membership.
Thanks, D.W. Griffith.
Yep, which owes a lot to Birth of a Nation, the 1915 film. And the burning of the cross is something that was invented for the film Birth of a Nation.
You're kidding.
That's true fact.
Fuck. Come on.
And then because it looked cool on film.
Come on.
And then the real KKK was like, that does look cool. We're going to do that too.
Oh my God, man. The way they talk about the KKK in this, I was so, I guess disappointed is the word. Okay, there are things that I like about it. Like, for example, when Crowther is talking to Warner and he's like, that he doesn't initially mention like it's good because we're getting rid of all the black folks. What he mentions is like they're paying us good because they have to give us money for the hoodies. It's like, oh God, like the role of the KKK in terms of like putting money into the local government and stuff, and not just like it. It's a really fascinating way that like Warner thinks about it and talks about it, where he's like, "Don't put my name on anything," and Crowther's like, "No, we're gonna do it and not tell you, but you have to tell me that it's okay." Which means you're basically putting your name on it. He's like, no, don't. He's like, no, I'm gonna do it. Like just the weird back and forth between them, where he's like, you have to let us do like a lot of white supremacy and like burn a lot of people and like have free reign, right? Say yes. And the guy's like, I don't think that's a good. It's fascinating too because that's the platform that Warner won on.
Right.
Many years ago, is he's saying, I'm going to be better than my father by being more openly racist about this, the more openly white supremacist. And now he's like, now that I'm in government, though, like, I didn't really want to do that anymore. Like, it just feels like the truth of the matter is that Warner as a character does not actually want to commit to any of this stuff. He just wanted the power and the money for himself.
Yeah, well, and the stuff that he, like, wants to commit to is the sort of, like, systemic voter suppression that isn't going to catch anybody's eye, right?
Yes.
So I think it's maybe more a thing of, if the KKK is running around this town and burning crosses and stuff, they're like drawing the attention of the nation to what they're doing. And to him, it's like, why can't we just stick with this systemic limiting of people's civil rights? That's a perfectly fine way to do white supremacy.
If we just get rid of all their rights, we don't have to do any burning or anything. And it's like, no. It really portrays the KKK as not what I have always understood them to be, which is like, we're going to install ourselves in government and like give ourselves power and also performatively like show off how horrible we are. It's more like, we do this. This is like our way of blowing off steam or something.
Yeah. And I think that's a useful way to complicate, because I think we have a sort of, not romantic in a good way, but like romanticized understanding or like cinematic understanding of what the KKK is.
Sounds like so do they.
Right. And they're a bunch of I don't know what the word is. They're terrorists. They're brutes. They're a lot of things. And there isn't any sort of beauty or subtlety to what they're doing. They're just like, I hate these people, I'm going to burn things. And what you start to see in the 10s and the 20s is also a broadening of the groups of people that are terrorized by the KKK, because the KKK also is a very openly anti-immigrant organization.
Yeah.
The guy that we were just talking about also talks about Jewish people and Catholic people.
Yeah.
And that adds an interesting dimension because it sort of complicates our understanding of like what it means to be white in the United States in the 1800s. Because we have the moment where the Jewish business owner, Mr. Goldstein, his business is burned down. And then he goes to Will Palmer and Will Palmer's family. And to Will Palmer, it's like, well, you're white. Why would these guys do something to a white person? And Goldstein is like, oh, I've seen the pogroms in Russia, and these KKK don't have anything on that. So like, there are just these vectors of subjugation and I don't know. I found that really fascinating.
Assertion of power, right? Well, because it's like we always need somebody to be under us. Like in order for this organization to continue flourishing, there has to be somebody who wants power that we have to reject and take away from them. Whether it is African Americans, whether it is Jewish people, and like it just really fascinating that he's like, yeah, Catholics, and you're like, wait, yeah, I mean the Irish were persecuted when they came to the United States. Like it's just the sort of imaginary quote unquote perfect white person will always look for somebody to consider worse, and different people from all walks of white people will try and get a piece of that and try and get a slice of that at different periods of history, which I think is fascinating too. Like, But I also think so. It's important that all of the stuff happening in the hometown here is like, hey, racism is still bubbling. Literally, the whole concept is Will Palmer is saying like they're gonna come back to a change. He like says in episode 4 like he's gonna come back from the war, to a changed town, a changed America, and he comes back and there's a shootout. It's white supremacists trying to shoot black men in the streets. Like this is the changed world that he comes home to. But then meanwhile, when they're at Lane College, because it's an all black college, there's a different type of stress, and it's the stress of like class and economic status, which I thought was fascinating. Like even because the whole reason that Bertha's getting like this guy in her class and in her like her group is like flirting with her, and he's this like fancy rich looking guy, and she rejects him because she's like, I'm not really into that kind of person. And then her friends are teasing her because they say, there's a dance coming up, who are you gonna ask? She says, I'll ask the next guy that comes up to me. And then bingo bango, Simon Haley with a patched up hole in his pants comes up to her to serve her food because he works at the college to pay for college. And she's like, hey, do you want to go to the dance with me? And it's obviously this cute moment where it's like, oh my God, what a coincidence. They wouldn't have fallen in love if she wasn't the guy that came up to her. But it's, it ends up being more of him worried about like, she doesn't like me because I'm like lower class, and like they're making fun of me for my pants, and I don't want her to see me like this, and I'm embarrassed.
Yeah. I loved how much of a dork he was.
He's such he
was so cute. And she's like making fun of him, and her friends are like, you're not going to go with him. She's like, maybe I will. And she
took that all the way and got married to him.
Yeah. Eventually. Well, it's just so, I don't know. I mean, I'm a sucker for that sort of plot where it's like, oh, now we're alone, and I realize that you're like really deep and brilliant, and it wasn't fair of us to make fun of your ripped pants.
And it's not complicated here, right? Like you can feel good about it because there's no like underlying weirdness or weird power dynamic there. It's just like, hey, we're both students here. We both like have our own types of struggles in life and come from families that have worked hard, and we appreciate each other's understanding of literature. Like that, it's that simple. And I think
it's like the whole time I was like, how does this go bad? You know what I mean? Like what happens, who dies, what's gonna happen. But it's just a very sweet love that they have.
And what's awesome is these are Alex Haley, writer of the book, Roots' parents. So like that must be really nice, I think, to write a like wholesome love story about your parents and then watch it and like help it assist it getting on film. And you're like, oh, that's my dad. Like, there are pictures. If you Google Simon Haley, they just had photography at this point. You can just see the guy. The actor playing him kind of looks like him. Like, that's not that far back, like we were saying in the last episode. This is a love story that's, like, pretty contemporary in the grand scheme of things. So we can relate to it and, like, appreciate it like that. But she starts to be enamored with him and his, like, ability to quote both Du Bois and Washington and all these other writers. And... you know, I like this like big picnic scene that they all have, and they leave on a train, and the two of them like share a really cute song there, and then they like hold hands, and you're like, oh, they're gonna fall in love. And you know, Roots has so much to do that like it doesn't have the bandwidth to like focus on two people falling in love for that long. But when you do, it's like, all right, cool. I get it. Like they like each other. This is a respectful relationship. Let's just get into it and like see their relationship progress past this fast.
Yeah, it's like not I don't know. I found it interesting because it's once they get together, you're sort of like, okay, cool, we're good. They're gonna be together. They're gonna have Alex Haley. I don't have to worry about them because it's sort of like whenever in the sitcom the two side characters get together and you're like, cool. Marshall and Lily are just going to be married.
That's forever. Just going to work.
Turk and Carla are never going to break up or whatever.
Yeah.
Right. It's like fine. And that's kind of the vibe with Simon Haley and Bertha of like, okay, perfect. They can be together. That can be great. We can focus on all this other stuff going on. And then once in a while we can have a nice scene with them where they're like, oh, I miss you so much.
Yeah.
Don't go away.
No, I miss you. And then, and they're, like I said, in their own lives, they have their own stress, because, you know, she says goodbye to him and calls him a dear friend. So her dad is like, wait, I thought you didn't like that guy.
A particular dear friend.
A particularly dear friend, which like, come on, we know. He is experiencing some horrible racism with his dad as they both, I think his father works as a sharecropper still.
I think so, yeah.
Which at this point in time is like kind of frowned upon as like you're doing... It's the same way that like manual labor is talked about now, where it's like, oh, you do like handwork but it's also like you're still doing the work for the white man that I thought we got past. And it's like, yeah, well, some people can't, you know, afford the education to do any other work. So Simon is kind of having this role put on his back of like, we need you to get smart so that this family doesn't have to work on farms anymore. That's like the weight put on him. But his father is also like, is it worth it? I'm just like dumping money into my kid's education. I don't have the money for this. This stuff also felt to me very like my parents dealt with this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Of like, you have to get educated because we didn't, and we don't want to be like in agriculture forever. So like Simon decides that he wants to get a master's degree in agriculture so that he can teach at an agricultural college, which we see at the end of episode 4 that he accomplishes. But he's running out of money, so he has to work at a train or on a train as a porter, which I guess are just like the people who like I don't know what the role of what this person's role would be now, like the attendee,
it's sort of like, because these Pullman, these are
Pullman, that's the word.
Like sleeper cars. So you get on the train and you have like a spot where you sleep. When you're going to your destination, and the porters check tickets and take care of the people who are on the car and that sort of thing. And so it's like I don't know.
And it's a job you kind of live at for a while. So he does it in the summer because it's like a 24/7 job, basically. He's working really rough shifts. We're introduced to one of my favorite characters in both these episodes, the character of Dad Jones. Who's just fantastic. I mean, not only because obviously he's pro starting a union and I love to see that, but also he's just like, he cares about Simon's education the way a lot of other people don't. And as a young person, like seeking to advance your life and your family through education, it's really nice to have somebody who is supportive of you like that and is like, I want you to continue doing your stuff. This guy's played by Ossie Davis, who I unfortunately know from the not so great film Bubba Hotep. It's a very dumb movie, but he's very good in it. I don't know what else I know him from, but I saw him and I was like, wait, is that Ossie Davis? Shout outs. And he says his name is Dad Jones, which I like. And we get a little of like picture of what the Pullman's jobs are like. They sleep together, they gamble together. We get a couple scenes where the gentlemen gambling are trying to get Simon to spend all of his money, and Dad George is like, don't fuck with him. Like, he let him save his money and go to school. He doesn't have to be ignorant like the rest of us, basically. I just really liked this, like, the show in 90-minute chunks has time to, like, slow down and kind of zoom in on a little part of the world that we don't think about usually, or that would have been, like, its own show or its own film otherwise. And instead, we just get to, like, spend 20 minutes on this train talking about, like, everybody who works on this train gets called George. We're all George because they don't learn our names. So if they yell for George, you have to go up to them and help them out and be a very nice man, or else they won't pay you. And so there's this like stress there about all these men trying to make their way, and Simon's realizing that this gig is not going to pay his way through college because it's not a like hourly or salary wage. It's more like if people come on the train, he gets paid once they start, and whether or not they get a lot of people also determines how much he gets. So he might just never make his money back. It sucks. And then, we basically, the like side plot here is just that Dad George is like recommending, or a red-haired gentleman recommends that he join a union. I don't know what the significance of the guy who turns out to be evil being red-haired is, but they did like notably point out that like, why is your hair red? And he's like, I don't know. Dad George is like, yeah, don't like take his money. He like pulls out a razor blade like an absolute badass on the people trying to steal Simon's money.
Yeah.
And he's again every time once Simon is like, my hours are terrible. He's like, if we had a union, they would be really great. And I think this like anti-union sentiment, especially in the early 20th century, is one of those things that people have like A, not talked about in history that much, and B, is just kind of still around in a lot of industries.
Oh, yeah.
Not necessarily... Well, actually, yeah, necessarily like people sneaking in union representatives trying to like get people to talk about this stuff and get them in trouble.
Yeah,
but
I
also,
would say our society is pretty anti-union, unfortunately.
Some people know who listen to the podcast that I work for the state. So I actually work with a lot of people who are union, and I've been... I've had an ear to like some union meetings, and I know like what that stuff sounds like now. And within a union, it's awesome. People are really kind and understanding, and it like feels out of character as like, if you work retail or you work salary, you don't like get to know the people that are here to support you ever, because who's here to support you? Is it HR? Because they're not. Is it your boss? Because they're super not. But for once, like having a union means that like there is a person whose entire job it is to make sure you're not being abused. And that's the short and long of it, and that you're being helped and that you're able to advance. But yeah, it turns out that the red-haired guy is a plant, and so Dad George gets laid off, or just like
he gets fired.
His hours cut.
Yeah, it's there's some historical context as to why the Pullman Corporation would be especially anti-union. There was like a really high-profile strike that happened in 1894 called the Pullman Strike. Where basically what happened is the factory town where they like make the cars is the town was called Pullman, and the workers lived there, and it was one of those towns in one of those company towns in the Gilded Age where like workers were paid in the company currency, the scrip or whatever it's called.
Yep.
And the company needed to save money, so they cut everybody's wages by like 25%, but they didn't change the prices of anything or the cost of people's rent. And so it's like, yeah, well, just go fuck yourself.
You make a quarter as much.
And it led to this really huge strike led by Eugene Debs, actually.
Oh, there you go. Eugene B. Debs.
Yeah, but then the government came in on the side of the Pullman Corporation, of course, as the government did quite often during the Gilded Age. But so it stands to reason that the Pullman Corporation is going to be very like on high alert about even an inkling of unionization because of events like that.
Wasn't Labor Day recognized in part because of the Pullman strike?
I believe that's true. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Thanks. One of my favorite days off of the year. But yeah, it's really great that like I had texted you before we started recording today about how like Roots sometimes feels like it's just hitting all of the bullet points of like a African American centric history course, and sometimes that like comes off as like it goes in the way of just telling a story of like we don't really actually we don't learn that much about like Simon and Bertha other than they love each other and they want to be together. We more learn about like the people that they read about, the books that they read, and the world events that are happening around them.
Yeah.
And I think that in a way though is part of what's valuable about a mini series is that it can be about the setting as much if not more than it is about the characters. Because when we covered Pride and Prejudice, that series is obviously concerned with the like class and structural dynamics of like romance and all of that stuff during that period and in that time.
Right.
So it is as much about, and like it's not about the core romance. The book that it's based on is not about the core romance. It's about the inner workings of like the people.
Right. Like watching, there is somewhat of a difference between like a period drama and a period miniseries. Because like Mad Men, obviously there's stuff
period drama
about the 60s, but also that show is very much about like the characters as people and the complexities and nuances of them as people. And you could transpose those characters to different time periods and adjust some things and still tell a pretty similar story.
Exactly.
But that's an interesting point that like the setting is like a character. It's a really important part of the story that's being told here.
Right, because if you asked me to give you 5 adjectives about like who is Simon Haley the character, I would kind of struggle. Like I don't think about the show in that way though, especially early on.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the people are the sort of lens through which we view the setting, as opposed to the setting being the lens through which we view the people.
And I think that's why I also made the comparison to you to like Forrest Gump, which I have huge problems with and kind of like comes at it from a very different angle. But like this is a character who's watching history happen in front of them. And whereas in Forrest Gump, it's kind of like using that to portray like this American who like does all the right things and things go well for him. It's kind of like an inverse version of that, where it's like this person's witnessing history and it's all happening in front of them. And like none of it is in their direction. None of the like tide of history never turns in their direction. It has to be pushed towards them over and over and over again. And it's like not naturally working in their favor right now. Even though we're seeing like, this is called, I think what was the term for this like couple of years here, like the nadir of race relations in America. It's like you would hope that Roots is about like how America as a whole starts turning towards civil equality, but in reality it's like, well, it's actually way, way, way more complicated. And in reality, they kind of are doing the same stuff, but changing the words on it.
Right.
But anyways, so Simon is given a blessing by a man who it was really strange to me that this plot line just kind of drops in. And if this happened in real life, then that's even more buck wild.
I think it is here because it must have happened in real life.
Right? Like at this point, you can't make this stuff up. This like happened in not in Alex Haley's lifetime, but in his father's lifetime. He is like on the train, working on the train one evening. A man asks him to get milk for his wife. He says, "The kitchen is closed, but I can heat up milk for you in my quarters." And the guy's like, "Thank you. What's your name?" And he says, "My name's George." The guy's like, "No, what's your name though?" He's like, "Well, I'm Simon Haley." And later that evening, they have a chat. And one of the things I like is like when white people talk to Simon, or I don't know if I like this, but the way that what ingratiates them to him is that he knows what he wants to do in life, and that he's like motivated and driven. Yeah. Both this guy and his commanding officer in the army are both like, "Wait, you know what you want to do? I just wanted to fuck around until I died. I just wanted to like, live my privileged life." And so this guy is really happy with him and says basically like, "What are your choices in life?" And Simon says like, "Well, it's either like if I find the money, then I go back to school, and if I decide that I can't do it and I'm not going to make it, then I'm going to use this money that I have to buy a mule and work on my dad's farm for the rest of my life." which kind of like becomes this, I don't know, like fantastical scene where he goes back to school because he decides like, I'm going to try to do school. I saved it up and I'm not going to give up on my dream. The guy before this, though, hands him $5 and is like, thanks. He says, thank you for that. When he goes back to school, though, somebody paid for all of his tuition.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out this guy who worked for a publishing company, I think he works for like the people who published the Saturday Evening Post, paid for his college, his room and board and everything on the stipulation that he went to get it. Because he was like, if you gave up on your dream and instead worked on your dad's farm, I would have taken the money back. Which is so, like, saccharine. It's like...
Yeah, it's really... I'm conflicted about it for a couple reasons. I mean, I think on the one hand, it's this example of the fact that at the end of the day, in a system of systemic inequity, allyship, it's a matter of like dollars and cents,
Right. Yeah.
Like Simon Haley doesn't need respect. He doesn't need like people to say nice words to him. I think
the guy saying what's your real name that's not allyship at all.
right. That's just like a basic humanity. The sort of allyship is like, I have money that, is maybe I have it because of my privilege or whatever. So here, let me give it to you. And you are someone who could put this to good use. So in a way, I think that that's a good thing. But I think the part of it that is troubling me is that you could put this to good use part of it. The like, I'm going to pass judgment on whether you're deserving of my money.
Right.
And I think it gets at this problem with the Du Bois idea of Black exceptionalism as a theory of change, mm-hmm. where, Du Bois and Simon Haley would say like the fact that Simon Haley is this exceptional person, reflects back on African American people, and it's a proof point of like, hey, white people, you're racist for thinking that African American people couldn't be this smart or whatever.
Right.
So that's one part of the exceptionalism argument, but the kind of corollary to it is, or white people could think that you are an exception to the prejudiced rule that they have about African American people, which kind of seems like what this guy on the train car thinks, and what it's like you seem like a good one. Yeah, like you are special, so you deserve to go to
golden
school.
Ticket,
as opposed to, well, everybody deserves that opportunity.
Right. That's the like frustrating thing underlying this nice kind moment. And to bring it back to the modern day, I mean, with social media, like how often do you see listener or Magellan like in your day-to-day life tweets that are like, hey, I'm a broke trans woman living in Brooklyn. Can you help me pay rent? This is my GoFundMe to pay rent. And because you see so many of them, you start playing this really fucked up game where I wish I could give everybody all like my entire paycheck, but in reality, I'm doing this like awful calculus where I'm like,
right.
Is this person worth my $100, my $200?
Yeah.
And I hate that it has to work like that. I truly do. But at some point, you have to decide like my money goes to someone.
Right.
But this guy is trying to do this and trying to help someone. But like you said, it seems like it's because he thinks that Simon is one of, quote, the good ones.
Yeah,
which is frustrating.
And it's a charitable act. Like I don't mean to subtract.
I wouldn't reject that money from Simon, right?
But yeah. But yeah, it's fraught in the sense that it's fraught in the way that any instances of individual charity like that are fraught, where, like you said, you're making value judgments and saying like, okay, well, if it had been a different porter, would he have given that person that much money?
And then if you try to think of it from the sort of like ground level structural issue here, college was and is too expensive. Like college education as a barrier to like lower income folks being able to access higher education and higher levels of pay in their employment is a problem that America is like still trying to deal with and figure out right now. Whether that manifests itself as free college, whether that manifests itself as reduced pricing on colleges, we don't know. But even in our day today, like I myself am someone trying to pay for a master's degree with my own money.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about how like making the value judgment of like this place is cheaper than this place. Like, is it worth it for the money? These are problems that still come up today. Absolutely. And it's super frustrating. Because like we had been talking last night, like, do you make all college free for everyone? But like, does the quality of the college still has to like meet a certain level? People have to get paid for their teaching ability. And also, like, if you are an employer, don't you think that the degree in some way should be representative of the person's skill? It's a very, very, very complicated subject. But again, I do like applaud Roots for addressing it and talking about it at least a little bit.
Yeah.
Even though it's very cleanly like, and then he's just done. He's fine. He has all the money he needs to do to college now. Thanks to this man from Curtis Publishing.
That's funny.
So then we get back to the dark times back home. Mr. Goldstein receives a threatening letter from the KKK. They parade through the town. Everyone's freaking out. They burn down his store, which is awful. And then, like you said, he goes back to Will Palmer's house. He calls him a mensch, and there's a very brief moment where Will's like, "Wait, what the fuck?" And he's like, "No, it means awesome dude. It means like great guy. I'm sorry, you haven't heard that term before." I think that the guy playing Will Palmer like kind of came into this role expecting to be the dad and not the young man, and that's why his young man acting was so like off. He was ready to perform.
The whole performance still is.
You still feel a little off.
It fits more as the dad, but I still feel like there's a total brick wall around this guy.
Yeah.
Which
I just think that works better as like a stoic dad who's like ignorant about the world. That's where that works a little bit, but yeah, it's very like he's playing against a bunch of people who are very emotional, and he's just like, yeah, get married if you want. What? So Bertha gets her dress from Mr. Goldstein, who leaves, and then she takes the whole family out to Simon's graduation, which he is not at. She's handed a letter that says that he has joined the U.S. Army in preparation for the First World War, and that she's going to pick up his diploma.
Things were so complicated and took so long before technology. Like, I know this is kind of like a pedestrian thing to think about, but can you imagine?
They had to travel hundreds of miles to pick up his diploma?
Yeah, you go all the way. And she's like kind of cool about it. I mean, she's upset with him when she sees him at the train station. And she's like, hey, what the hell? I brought my family to your graduation and you weren't there. And he's like, yeah, sorry. They said I had to ship out. I couldn't do anything about it.
I'm doing it for patriotism. I love you. We'll come back soon.
Text. I'm sorry.
I'll write you. And then he like doesn't for a while. They do get their last like their kiss goodbye, which is a cute scene where he's with his new platoon, and he's like, she's right there. She's literally right there, and they're like, no, you can't see her. And he's like, please. And the guy's like, all right, 5 minutes, but do it behind a wall. And he's like, kissy, kissy, kissy. We get a hint of what African Americans are going to be dealing with in the military in this time, with like the brass calling them a word that I'm not going to say that starts with the letter C. Where I was like, oh, they're just, it's another different way of like control and exerting power over people.
Yep. Is
you manipulating their patriotism by being like, yeah, you guys can fight with us too. You can die for us as well, right?
Yep.
But that's for episode 4. And he waves goodbye to her for like the 5th time in this one episode. Yeah. He's like, bye from a train. There's so many scenes of them waving goodbye from trains.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess that makes sense for the time. Cool. Well, I thought it was a fun episode. Well, fun is not exactly the right word I would use. I thought it was an engaging episode. But if you're good, Magellan, I think we should take it to a musical break.
Yeah, the only thing we didn't mention that I wanted to mention is...
Oh, yeah.
There's a very charming Will Palmer moment at the beginning where he was talking about how Bertha helped him come up with his like slogan for his business, and it's like it's like lumber number or something like that, and he's
first
like,
come lumber, and then right after come the number.
That was cute.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
Will Palmer, unintentionally the funniest character in this series.
Also, it's a bummer that they at the beginning they were like, yeah, by the way, Tom and Irene are dead. Sorry. It's like, come on. They were great.
Yeah, they rush by a lot of stuff sometimes where I'm like, oh no, I wanted... Okay. That's okay. I'm not sad. No, I'm a little sad because Tom was awesome.
I guess they got a good final moment where they were like, the family's going to go on.
True. But with that, we'll take it to a brief musical break, and we will be back to discuss episode 4 of Roots: The Next Generations.
Welcome back to RootsChatz. The second episode we watched this week was Roots: The Next Generations, Part 4. The teleplay was by Sidney A. Glass. It was directed by Charles S. Dubin. It originally aired February 22nd, 1979. Alan, what happened in Part 4?
Well, Magellan, I'm really glad you asked. In this episode, with 8 soldiers hanged for staging a mutiny in the 24th Infantry, Bertha is worried about Simon. Criticizing the army during wartime isn't necessarily a safe practice, however. Will Palmer finds that the local draft board isn't applying the rules fairly to black folks. The army is commanded by white officers only, and black men get little respect. One of Simon's fellow black soldiers, Haywood, is badly beaten by a state trooper, and some in the platoon want to take revenge, but it's Haywood who talks sense into them. They're soon sent overseas, and in France, face the Germans in combat, but failure to provide covering artillery fire leads to death as they attempt to take out a machine gun nest. While in the trenches, Simon learns that his father died on the operating table. He's also wounded in a gas attack, and in the hospital meets a Senegalese soldier. They celebrate Armistice Day and make plans for the future. Simon believes that it will be different for black folks at home now that they've fought for their country. That's not to be, however, as whites reassert their authority. Simon and Bertha are married, but Will is not too happy when he learns that the newlyweds will soon be living for Ithaca, New York, where Simon will continue his studies at Cornell University. Oof. So, meteor summaries, but definitely useful. Mm-hmm. Whoever writes the IMDb summaries, shout outs to you because those are really good. Gets into all the important stuff, hits all the big scenes, but doesn't cover everything because that's our job. John, what did you think about this episode now that we're focusing more on World War I and how that affects sort of race relations in America?
I was less into this one than the first one we watched this week. I think just because of the set of historical events that it covered, it kind of made brief reference to the things that I find the most interesting and dwelled on things that I don't find as interesting. Like, I don't really care about war personally. Mm-hmm. I guess that sounds kind of crass, but as a historian, seeing depictions of battle and talking about the lives of soldiers and stuff, I'm just not super invested in that.
Yeah.
So those parts of this episode I was not that interested in. But I do think that the sort of preamble to them leaving, and then the part after the war is over and these African American soldiers are coming back to American society, and what are the complications mm-hmm. inherent in that. Those things I found interesting, and I think the episode kind of glossed over them a little bit. And it might spend more time with them next time, but I'm not so sure about that.
The one aspect I liked a lot about the military stuff was not watching the conflict, not the like long shots in the trenches and all that stuff, but it was afterwards in the Armistice Day discussions where one of the soldiers is talking about like not defecting, but like staying in France basically. And as someone who has often considered like packing up and moving to a different country, especially in the last couple of years, it's really fascinating to watch the like American identity start to shape itself around like, no, you don't want to leave. We have it good here. Come on, right? Like, we got it. And how that conversation, like verbatim, is still happening today.
Yeah.
By people who just refuse to accept that, national identity does not have to be exclusive. You can identify with different countries and be part of different countries. But before we get there, we start on a very, very dark scene that I am impressed again with Roots for showing us. Yeah. This seems to be the hanging of the soldiers involved in the Houston riots of 1917. Do you mind giving a little bit of background on that situation?
Yeah, I don't know too much about it personally. This scene, I was like, wait a minute, this seems like something that I have heard of before. So I did some cursory research before we started recording. But essentially, the beginning of the episode, we see a group of, I think, like 8 or 12, I think it's 8 African-American men who are hanged by, presumably, it looks like members of the military. And what you learn later in a discussion among people in the Palmer household is that they were members of the 24th Infantry, which at the time was an all-black regiment of the U.S. Army. And this regiment was stationed, or they were training or something, in Houston. Mm-hmm. And then some of them were attacked by Houston police officers. And then their fellow soldiers like tried to fight with the police officers and protect their friends. And then that sort of ballooned into this larger conflict,
like a violent conflict.
Mm-hmm. And then those soldiers who were involved, the black soldiers who were involved in the conflict, were punished in some cases with being kicked out, and in some cases with death. Right.
So immediately we go from Simon Haley being like, it's my sworn civic duty to be a part of this like national, we're defending our national values. And then we cut in this episode to, what are those national values even? Right. And do they serve you? And that's the conversation happening amongst his soldiers and his friends in the military. Is like, we know we're not fighting for people who have our best interests in mind. So why are we fighting ultimately?
Yeah. And it's interesting to see Simon Haley. What I like about Simon Haley as a character is that he's very willing to believe in people and believe in the best in the world, Mm-hmm. Like he starts by excitedly quoting Booker T. Washington saying like, oh, the different races will be like fingers on the hand would come together in a fist or whatever, which is essentially him saying separate but equal is okay. But anyway.
Yes.
But Simon Haley's, saying this stuff like, yeah, this guy's great. He's really saying what I'm thinking. And then he feels the same way about Du Bois. And he even is talking about what Woodrow Wilson is saying, about how the purpose of the war is to make the world safe for democracy, with this almost pride of like, yeah, I believe that. I believe in democracy. And the other guys are kind of like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? I'm here because if I didn't join the army, I was going to go to prison. Or like, I'm here because, I make some money, or I'm here because they drafted me or whatever. And Simon Haley's like, no, but democracy.
They're like, no. Poor man.
So I find that endearing. I also was surprised to learn, actually, through Roots, that W.E.B. Du Bois was a supporter of World War I.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they're saying in the episode. A couple times, Simon Haley is like, well, W.E.B. Du Bois says, like, right, we need to set aside the particular concerns of African American people and fight for our country. And I was surprised to hear that, because it really, Du Bois is really buying into this idea that like I was saying in the first half, that there are these sort of institutional ways to enshrine your dignity, and for Booker T. Washington, it's like, how do you enshrine your dignity? With like a business, or with the sweat of your brow, or whatever. For Du Bois, it's like, well, with a degree, or with a position as a writer, or, with books that you wrote, or your whatever role in society. And also Du Bois is like, or with military service. If you go and you fight for the United States and you wear the uniform, that is going to carry with it a certain level of respect, and it's going to embolden African American people and lead white people to see that, like, look, we're invested in America, and we're not so different, you and I.
Well, what I think is fascinating about that Du Bois argument too is, like, even in this episode, there's enough nuance that they show that, like, some white people do feel like that. Like, because I'm fighting alongside these men, I believe in them, and I suddenly, like, have the scales fall from my eyes a little bit. I'm like, oh, these are like people just like me, and they deserve all the respect in the world. But not everybody's like that.
Right.
So
yeah, I guess I'm sort of hindsight is 2020 it right now.
Yeah, that's the year we're in.
Yeah, that's true. It just feels, I don't know, because in all other aspects, Du Bois is like a very incisive thinker, and so it's interesting to me that even someone like Du Bois, in the moment of like, we're all gonna go and fight the Germans and fight for democracy, that even a voice like Du Bois is like, hell yeah, here we go, let's ride. Which I think just speaks to the power of that lie, and really the power of that lie across American history,
Yeah.
The sort of rallying cry of World War II or the War on Terror or whatever, where it's like, we're fighting for good old American values, and here we go, let's do it.
Right, that's the way that you get soldiers, is you tell them they're doing this not for themselves and not for civil rights, but for their country. And that it's a higher power, that it's like religion. In some cases, like, it's literally a religious justification for war. Mm-hmm. I think, too, that it's good that they show, like, some people are buying into the war back at home that are not participating in it. Like I said earlier, Will Palmer sitting in his easy chair reading the Chicago Defender and getting mad at socialists. And he has the line here, they're going to start saying that black folks ain't patriotic, which is extremely it's extremely relevant today with the whole, like, is fighting against either police brutality or fighting against the structural systems of our government not patriotic, and like, what does that even mean anymore?
Yeah,
and
like, how Black Lives Matter is un-American.
Exactly. And it's
or like fucking Tom Cotton. Yeah. Don't get me started on this guy, but he's like trying to ban the teaching of the 1619 Project. In schools, because he's like, it's un-American, people hate their country, blah, blah, blah.
Fuck off, Tom Cotton.
Yeah, fuck you, dude.
Also, just F Bill Clinton for while we're at it, just for...
Oh my god.
Yeah, we don't need to get too into it, but this week in racism, Bill Clinton basically misquoted and wrongfully talked about Stokely Carmichael as if he knows what he's about at the funeral for John Lewis, mentioning that, like, John Lewis is an example of a peaceful, good protester, and Carmichael was not, and that he almost leaned, quote, too far towards Carmichael, which, fuck off, Bill Clinton.
Yeah, he's talking about SNCC, about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he's like, oh, it started to lean a little too much towards that Stokely Carmichael guy. Oh, I'm scared of him. Because he sat in a chair with a gun.
How dare he?
Yeah. But that, you see that same anxiety actually represented in this episode. To jump, I think this is a fine one to jump around.
Yeah.
Because it feels pretty. I don't know what the word is, but there's not a lot of twists and turns in the plot.
No, the war happens.
Right. It's the war. Simon Haley's gonna go to war. He goes to war, and then he comes back from the war.
Yes.
But we see a moment where Andy is talking to Bertha and the Palmers, and he's like, "Oh, Simon, you're like your boyfriend or whatever is at the war, huh? You have a picture of him?" And she's like, "I don't want to show you a picture." And then Will Palmer's like, "It's fine." And then she shows Andy the picture, and he's like, "Well, it's a nice picture." And then he goes to the the sort of required Roots meeting of the white racists where they can go talk about how they're going to do the racism this time. And they're like, "Did you see that those black men had guns?"
Oh my God. They give it to them by the government?
Yeah.
Disgusting.
But it, that becomes a real point of anxiety, because there are a couple. Okay, so here's part of the backdrop of historical backdrop.
I was going to ask you, because I don't want to keep pivoting this conversation to like, let's laugh at the shitty white people, but there's context for all of this stuff.
I just think the way that Roots presents it sometimes is funny. I don't think that the content of what they're talking about is funny.
No, of course.
But it feels like they always cut to like the League of Evil in their
exactly.
cave or something.
Meanwhile, in the KKK room, the KK cave.
Yeah, right. So the biggest what's the word for it? The biggest demographic change that's happening in this period of time is something called the Great Migration, where en masse African American people are migrating from the South to cities in the North and sort of in the West, as the West is developing. So like there's a scene where Simon and Bertha are at that party, that like jazz party in Chicago.
Awesome. Yeah.
And it's like, oh, these are city folk, and we're country folk or whatever. So you can see that's starting to shift as African American communities coalesce to a greater extent in northern cities. And there are a number of reasons for that change to take place. One of them is tangentially mentioned actually in the first episode, I think. Someone's talking about the boll weevil. I don't remember who says it, but the boll weevil was this insect that like ruined, I don't remember the crop or if it was a bunch of crops or something, but essentially agriculture was hit particularly hard over the stretch of a few years in the early 1900s because of this boll weevil. So it's part of the reason that Black people are being driven northward for other opportunities besides agriculture. Part of it is systemic racism and racial terrorism and violence carried out by state governments and by the KKK. Part of it is just that the North is continuing to industrialize, and so there's increased opportunity for work
out
there.
Yeah.
And then part of it is that to a certain extent, white men going off to fight in the war leaves increasing vacancies in those same industrial centers. So for a number of reasons, you get this migration northward. And what ends up happening is what's talked about. And I was saying that something was sort of brushed past at the beginning of this conversation. And the thing that's kind of brushed past is a series of events called the Red Summer.
Yes.
Where in 1919, following the return of soldiers from World War I, there's a series of conflicts. I guess you could call them race riots, but that's a weird term. But there's a series of race riots across cities in the North because of now this new proximity between African American people and white people in these places where there weren't substantial Black populations before. And one of the reasons you could posit for why that violence took place, in part, is because of a shift in attitude of the Black soldiers who are coming back from the war, who are sort of emboldened by military service, by the fact that like I just went and liberated like one of the most important cities in the world. I was just in Paris.
Right.
I just freed them from Germans. And then I come home and I get treated horribly.
Fuck
no,
that.
thank you. Fuck that. And it's this shift, I think, from a kind of resistance that was born out of slavery, where it's like, I'm going to do this sort of resistance that's like totally behind the back of white people. And the sort of the genius of it is they're never going to realize that I'm fucking with them all the time. And then this is sort of moving to a place of like, you know what? Like, fuck you. I'm going to write on a sandwich board on my chest, I am a man, and march through the street in front of you. I'm going to like not back down when there's the potential for violence or whatever. So in a way, this white people in their cave looking at the picture of black men with guns is like kind of goofy in the way that it's presented. But also it shows a genuine concern for white supremacists of like, okay, these men have been empowered. They've been trained to fight. They have this like sense of their own importance and dignity.
Yeah.
And so like, that's a problem for white supremacists. What are they going to do about it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating migration, and it reflects like in general the sort of like shifting towards more political, I guess, like towards, like I said, more politically left ideologies in different parts of America, because of moments like this where people are like, well, the world that I come back to is not the one that I expected, so I'm going to actually pick up roots and start somewhere else. And like that also comes by in the tension at the very end of this episode when Will Palmer is like, wait, like, and I genuinely, when I was first watching it, like didn't understand why he was so anxious about Bertha and Simon leaving, other than like, obviously you're sad that your kid is leaving. But it's also this matter of like, we've been keeping the family here as long as we can. Like, we only move when we have to. Why are we suddenly deciding where do they decide to go to New York? Because they're going to Cornell. Mm-hmm. And it's like, yeah, that was a kind of new concept, both for all a lot of Americans, was that like your kids are going to move far away from you, and not be able to like support you directly. So
that's a good point.
It comes from a lot of different angles that they discuss here, which is again really, really fascinating. One of the things that Will Palmer deals with in this episode, which is pretty brief, we don't have to spend too much time on it, but there's a man named Luke who comes to his house and basically needs his help fighting for him in the courts because he takes care of his whole family as a farmer, and he's trying to not go be drafted because he says like they're dependent on me, and there's a law that says that if your family's dependent on you as the only money maker, then you don't have to go to war. They're not allowing that, and their argument basically goes from like, it's not in the word of the law that we actually have to do this for you, because when he's like, well, there's precedent, we go to the court scene and there's Crowther and everybody else, and they're all like, well, he's like, there's precedent, somebody else got to do it. They're like, yeah, well, he had like an affidavit, and he had like his farm. This is the so fucked up part about this. His farm gave money to the town and was more like economically viable for us. You work for yourself, so your money doesn't help us anyways. And then he's like, that's not fair. I'm helping everybody as much as everyone else is. And then instantly Crowther's like, you're lazy. And why are we always letting people avoid the draft for like lazy people avoid fighting for their country? It's like, well, there you go. There's no fighting a system that doesn't give you a chance. Whether you're Will Palmer, who like literally has the law in his hand and is like, I can quote cite the law to you. Yeah. You're like, yeah, no. I decided no.
And then just the line that to me was like the most offensive was Will Palmer is like, okay, he's clearly like a person who provides for a family or whatever the law says, and he's trying to argue with them, and he's like, listen, fair is fair. And to Will Palmer, he's a person who, in some ways, he's kind of like Tom, in that he's like, if I just go by the book and follow the rules
and use their law against them or whatever, then it'll work out.
Yeah. And it turns out that it doesn't really work that way. And there's this line where one of the guys on the panel says, was this in the first episode or was this in the second one?
The stuff I'm talking about is in the second episode.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I found it. Yeah, the line was, "You're impugning the impartiality of this board. Now there'll come a day where I'll remember that, Will Palmer."
Right.
And it's like, holy shit. He's talking about impartiality, but he's also talking about, like, I'm going to punish you for going against us. I'm going to hold a grudge against you. I'm going to subjugate you, because that is what we're all about. And
right.
It's not even like, listen, we are impartial. It's like, listen, we're not impartial, but you're not allowed to say that to our face. You can't
say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very sad, and it further shows that in this small town and in Will Palmer's life, I mean, always whenever they do the generational shift in Roots, it's like the young people like go out and try to make something for themselves, and the old people have to deal with like the repercussions of how society that stagnates and like doesn't give anybody a chance, what that means for them.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, I mean, like Simon's in the military. We don't have to hit all of his scenes, but I did really like the scene where one of the gentlemen comes back from being assaulted, actually, and like trips over, and everyone tries to help him. And even Simon is very quickly ready to be like, okay, I mean, I guess if we're gonna take up arms and like protest, I'm willing to help you guys out. Like, he's not 100% strictly a pacifist in this situation. He does argue briefly, say like, nah, I don't know if this is a good idea, but then they're like, no, seriously, like they will not do anything for us. And then right before they go out, the guy is like, no, this happened a year ago in Houston. Every one of us is going to be killed and be hanged. Why would you do that to yourselves for me? This is not a fight worth fighting right now. Which is frustrating, you know, but it's a self-preservation tactic ultimately. Like, you have to keep your people alive. And I like that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's in the scene too where they're talking about how we're fighting Germans. One of them says, what do I have against the Germans anyways? It seems to me we're fighting the wrong white men. Because, like, they don't know what the Germans are up to. They don't know what their whole political and, like, civil system is like in Germany. They're just like, we're told they're bad guys by our white men, which...
Yeah, and there's this line, I can't remember who says it, but there's this offhanded line about, like, make the world safe for democracy. Like, what about make Georgia safe for democracy?
Right.
Yeah.
Or what does democracy mean for us?
Yeah.
Which comes back later. Actually, we can also touch on the party scene very briefly. Just because I loved hearing the jazz music and seeing all the people dancing. I thought that was, like, a nice moment of like, romance for Bertha and Simon, but also, like, yeah, there are places where African Americans can like be themselves and be sexual romantic beings and enjoy their own music and enjoy their own alcohol and culture and all this stuff. Like, it's just a genuine, like, you know, going against the notion that Roots is entirely a story about Black suffering. There's also a lot of, like, you know, watch this joy in these folks. And this is like not a scene that goes badly, you know?
Yeah.
They go outside because they want some privacy. The guy who's hosting the party, Doxy, who's in Simon's platoon, I believe, is like, hey, do you guys want to like party with us? And the girl's like, I have this big bed. They keep talking about her like big 6 foot
bed. I have a room upstairs if you want some privacy.
They're like,
and
no, we
like,
don't.
Simon, come on. What are you doing?
It's your last night. Come on, just
and he's like, no, we're good. We'll shiver on the balcony.
They're good Christian kids. Simon every once in a while is like, no, it's okay, I'm temperate. Like when he talks to the Senegalese guy, and he's like, no, I'm temperate. And the guy's like, I don't know what that means.
just drink my booze.
Drink my booze. He's like, okay, I will. You got it. But yeah, we get to them in France, and we get some. This is very boring to me, honestly. It's just like combat. What happened to home base? Why aren't they supporting us? Even though that turns out to be another like racially charged moment.
The one thing that I think is worth. It's, out of all the war stuff, you kind of get these two white characters. There's the
I don't know any of the names of
positions
their ranks.
I don't know their ranks, but there's like the guy who's with
Simon
Simon and with the company, and he's like their direct commanding officer.
Yeah.
And he's sort of like
he's extremely 3 seconds from retirement, by the way, when he's like, wow, I'll look at the birds, Simon, you go do work.
Yeah. And he's like, I'm very rich and I'm just going to have dinner for the rest of my life.
Good line.
He like loses an eye or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good line. But there's him, and then there's the guy above him who's like the desk job. I don't know what it is, captain or something.
Yeah.
And both of them have very different attitudes towards being stationed with an all-black regiment. The guy who's like higher up sees it as this sort of punishment position, or like, oh, they've stuck me here and I need to just keep my nose down and do my work and get promoted out of here because this is like a dead-end, shameful position. And the other guy is like, well, these are my men. I need to fight with them and believe in them because I'm literally in the trench next to them getting shot at. As they have this confrontation where there was no artillery to support them. Mm-hmm. And it was a really infuriating scene because the direct commanding officer guy is like, the artillery wasn't there. We needed that.
They're always, he's like, they're always late. They miss things all the time.
And then the higher up guy was like, well, they were going to lose the battle anyway. So like, don't put that on me.
Yeah.
The fact that black people aren't good at things is basically what he says. And it's like, Jesus Christ.
This guy just has the position to say stuff like that and to enact that on people. He's basically ready to wipe out an entire platoon, even though there's one white guy on there. It's just like, they're not useful.
Something that I sort of am drawing from these two episodes is obviously racism is deeply cruel, and we've seen many examples of it.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's deeply manipulative. It's also just really fucking stupid. It's just like, it's a horribly stupid and inefficient and bad way to structure organizations and societies, because demonstrably, like, the dude who needs a doctor dies because the nearest doctor is black.
Yeah.
Or like the army can't fight its war because it is presuming that certain soldiers are like less invested or less good or less smart than other soldiers.
Yeah.
It's just dumb. And I know that's not like that's far from the most important argument that you could levy against racism, of which there are a million.
Yeah.
But it's just like so illogical and stupid to be racist.
But like, in this case, right? Because like the racism in the time of slavery, obviously not like, I don't know. It's extremely profitable for America to have slave labor, for worse and for worse, right? But in this case, it's like you're putting yourself at a disadvantage for the sake of this like racial superiority and white supremacy. It's terrible. I also thought it was fascinating because I think I learned about this like fact of history from you actually before this episode, which is that the Germans would like fly over American trenches and drop pamphlets when they knew that there were like black soldiers in those platoons, saying things like, "Huh?
I didn't know that."
You didn't know that before this episode?
Mm-mm.
I definitely, like, some history class I learned that, and I thought it was so fascinating because they get these pamphlets that are like, "Hey guys, hey black soldier reading this, what's up? Hi, it's me, Germany." They're very, the way it's read in this scene, it's like, like it's like like they sent a tweet over or something that's like, "What's up? How you doing? Yeah, I'm Germany. I'm the embodiment of a country. You guys got democracy over there? What's that word mean? Do you know? We have no racism. Come to Germany, jump over the trenches, leave your weapons, leave your platoon. We think you're cool." And as I understand it, this is historically a thing that did happen. It's a disinformation campaign.
I believe it.
I
mean, it's not,
or not. It's an information campaign.
Yeah, I don't think it's disinformation.
I was like, how do I word this exactly? It's an information campaign.
That was a tactic of Soviet Union propaganda during the Cold War. Also, like, I show my students this one image that says in Russian, on one side it says "under communism," and it's like people of a bunch of different races, and they're all happy wearing whatever clothes they want to wear, and they're all hanging out and being communists together.
Hell
and
yeah.
then the other side says under capitalism, and it's this like dark image of a black man in chains looking up at the Statue of Liberty, and it's like he's clearly, being subjugated and oppressed, and that was the Soviet Union thing too, of like, come on, is that society really better? What are you saying right now?
And well, so maybe I actually got that mixed up, and you had told me that, and I like copy pasted it onto this war. But yeah, definitely a pretty common tactic. And I would have given Roots some crap for this if this was the only time we saw like Europe and the way that Europe like treats different people of color. But later, after the war, so actually before we get there, I mean, like, I want to talk about the Armistice Day scene. I think that's one of my another favorite scene in this episode. Mm-hmm. But the Germans gas their camp. Simon puts a mask on himself and then puts one over the commanding officer who was looking through the binoculars. And then when they're in the hospital recovering from the gas, we get a short but really beautiful, like touching scene, I think, where he wakes up next to a man and asks him questions, and the guy is speaking Senegalese to him, and he's like, wait, I'm sorry, I don't, he says, I'm sorry, buddy, the folks, they didn't carry on the language. But we're both from Africa. And he's like so blown away that like, you're another African and we're not of the same culture. Like he's experiencing that multiculturalism for the first time.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, right? Because you're like, when we talk in the very first episode of Roots, how like there were all the different members of different tribes on the first slave ship that we saw, and how they're all like, yeah, we're all from different places, but we're from the same continent. Mm-hmm. And now he's seeing that in America in the 20th century as like, oh, this guy lived a different life than I do. He chose to come here.
And it's happening around the same time that we see some scenes in either the previous episode or this one where someone like kind of brushes aside the Kunta Kinte story and is like, oh, whatever, I don't hear that old story.
Yeah, I know, like Bertha is like, I hate hearing about the story of the African. I'm sick of it.
Right. And we... at this point, like, we don't remember his name. We don't remember his foot being cut. We don't remember the word for river. It's like those details are getting lost.
Exactly.
At the same time that Simon Haley is having this really powerful moment of like connection across language and across cultural origin. Yeah.
Even the nurse is like, he doesn't even speak French, so none of us understand him.
So Senegal was colonized by the French.
By the
right?
French, yes.
And so is that what's happening here, that they're like drafting people from Senegal into their army to fight this war?
At least that's how I understood it, yeah. I said a minute ago that he chose to come. It's actually likely that he did not. But yes, that's how I understand the history of Senegal.
Yeah, that's pretty fucked up.
Yep. The war is quote unquote over though. And everyone's on the way home. Everyone hopes that America will be different. And Doxy, who's one of my favorite characters in this episode, this like member of Simon's group who like is so excited to drink and to have sex and to go out, and he has no attachment to America anymore. And he says, I'm staying in France. They're not taking me with them. Mm-hmm. And you know, he's okay with that. They're kind of like, that's a little weird. I thought we all wanted to like go back to a better America. And he says, no, fuck that. None of that. And he like has this woman, this French woman who's like kissing him, and she's like congratulating everyone. It's a little silly, but I think it taps into another cultural thought that I've been like having even in my own life, which is like we were saying earlier, people in America like kind of balking at people that talk about leaving the country because they're like, come on, we can make this place better if we stay here. Why do you want to leave to go somewhere else? Like when I would jokingly tell people when I came back from France, like, oh, I kind of want to stay, and they're like, oh, they're all I would literally get people saying like, oh, they're all lazy over there. Why would you want to go somewhere where nobody works? And I'm like, oh my god, like, come on, guys, fuck off.
Oh my god,
like we're in it. Capitalism digs deep, baby. And so the higher up officers are not having this, and I think one of them calls, or no, this is later when someone calls him obstreperous. I think Mr. Warner.
Later.
Yeah, I just was thrilled about that. But they're getting mad, and they're like, no, we can't let them leave. We're shipping them back. I think, as I understand it, they're shipping the black soldiers back first to prevent this from happening, in part, to prevent them from staying.
Yeah, I think the higher up dude is sort of seeing a bunch of black men celebrating their victory, and he's sort of like, okay, they're starting to get ideas about their place in society.
Right.
And he's like, okay, it's time to go back to the United States where we strictly enforce racial difference and white supremacy, so that you don't start thinking that, you can overthrow those things or something.
Right. It's giving you ideas. And also, you guys having guns for too long is giving you ideas. Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, it's fucked up. It's a horrible scene.
Fully.
I was amused by the guy who loses his eye, and he's their direct superior. He's gonna be a student at the Sorbonne because he went to Harvard or something.
Balls.
And then he's like, I'm gonna study all these people and Balzac. And then the guy's like, rah, 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 and he's like, Balzac. And takes a big swig, just a drink.
Because he's like, you don't tell me what to do anymore. I'm no longer under your leadership.
Yeah. I want to be honest about something.
Please.
About how I felt about that character, the guy, the white commanding officer guy who becomes friends with Simon Haley. There's this part of me that this plot really works on, where you see a white person get their first black friend in life.
Yeah.
And realize whoa, wow.
You guys are so nice.
You guys are just like me. Black people are people too. And it warms my heart in a way that I was really upset about when I was watching this. Because it's that's not a thing that I should be wiping the tears from my eyes and applauding this brave white guy made a black friend, I guess it's sort of hey, we really can get along, and that's heartwarming, but it always feels so congratulatory of the white people who are having this revelation.
Yeah.
And I think that is a big problem.
But I appreciate you for saying that, because it also recalls in episode 3 the man giving Simon all of the money for college, where it's I know you have to acknowledge as a critic when a show or when a work is asking you to feel a certain way. Yeah. And in both of these scenes, they're kind of saying isn't this nice? Isn't this a good moment amongst all this tragedy? And in both cases, those acts of kindness are being given on the work and the struggle and the sacrifice of the black characters. Because in the case of Simon on the train, it's well, I helped you and I do my job for you and I do really good work, and that's why you respect me, and I go to college like a good kid. And in the case of this guy, it's well, you saved my life and you fought a war that you knew wasn't a good idea, and you put the gas mask on me and you were nice to me and you listened to me.
And also I see you as an intellectual.
And I know you're smart and you have plans in life, so I like that about you. It kind of feels like Simon Haley is being given all this acts of kindness because, like you were saying, he's worked hard.
Yeah, it kind of it's interesting to think about it in comparison to, say, the characterization of Old George.
Yeah.
Where Old George didn't treat the black people on the plantation well because he saw them as exceptional people or something.
He literally did not
understand. He treated them well because it's it's the human thing to do. I like you guys, you're my family. And so those felt like much more substantial moments of allyship and respect when he goes and he's takes the whip and is whipping the ground next to Tom to save his life or whatever. As opposed to this guy being you know what, Simon? You're a pretty smart guy. I like you. I like that you know the names for bird types. That's awesome.
Yeah. You want to go to school? That's great. You have a job you're going to get, a master's degree. Fantastic.
Yeah, but it just frustrated me the way that they're playing sad music over this scene and now I'm feeling something and I feel like I'm being manipulated.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was being manipulated and buying it.
Always good to acknowledge, like I said, because that's how you prevent it from working. Now and in the future. But the show then pivots to more tragedy back home. It's just like, hey, did you think everything was okay? Cut to Earl Crowther is talking to Warner, talking about how like all these men are back and a bunch of them are armed and we're not going to have that. I still want to do these rallies and I still need your support, Warner. And he says, this is just awful. He says, I will only support you with dignity. I'm willing to support the KKK, but with dignity. I'm not going to take up arms myself. I'm not going to put on the stupid hood, but I'll help you guys however I can. Which is just...
Sucks.
It's not even sucks. I wish I had better words for it, man.
Yeah, right.
Like the way that he's just like, yeah, this still helps me. This is still valuable to my political platform. It's awful. We see a lot of this in, for example... David Duke supporting Donald Trump and Donald Trump not denouncing that and just being like, that's weird.
Yep.
That's not even that different from this scene. That's really not. Like, I'm sure they had this conversation. Oh, man. But we get to some really some big violent, I guess, action scenes. A bunch of Simon's like platoon are I don't know where they are here. I think they're back at home in his like town, because Crowther comes through and a bunch of the police, or I guess like a bunch of men come through and start shooting at them and like throwing Molotov cocktails and burning down their houses, and it's just absolute chaos and violence. And usually, as we said before, they were able to be armed. This would just be a simple like case of like one-sided lynching, end of story, awful. But they're like, no, we actually can fight back now. We are trained in combat. And it becomes a shootout. And it's like a pretty long shootout scene where the guy who was injured previously is like shooting at Crowther. And they notice that he's out of bullets. And just an awful scene. I don't want to describe it too much in detail, but he tries to run at them with the bayonet and it's shot. And then I guess finally, I was really satisfied by the moment when Doxy ambushes Boyd from behind and puts his gun down and lifts up his razor, and he, as we learn later, killed Boyd Crowther with his razor blade. So finally, some sort of retributive justice here. But the violence in this town continues to escalate, and it's just like there's that, and they do the hard cut, like the 70s horror movie hard cut of Boyd screaming. He's like, oh my God. And then like Bertha and Simon being like, oh my God, I love you. I want to get married. You're like, the show is going to give me an aneurysm sometimes. The way that they're like, oh, we don't have time. We got to go. They get married. Sergeant Hayward's not here because he died. It's so sad. I believe the older, what's his face? The older mayor, his wife comes and she's from New York, and I love the line just because I know that you're from New York, and the like cultural assumption that New York is like a liberal state is when she's like, in New York we'd never think of going to an N-word wedding. And you're like, wait, the coastal elite are supposed to be nice. Wait, what? She's just awfully awful racist. Then basically Will, it seemed like he was going to ask Simon for some money. I was a little bit confused here what like Will was asking Simon for. Or was it more just like, please don't take my daughter far away?
I think, I don't know, it's such a weird thing because Will in episode 3 is like upset that they're on the porch talking for so long and that Simon didn't have to jump through hoops with him the way that he did with Tom.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like he actually cares if Simon does that. It just feels like he's sort of grumpy that he had to.
Yeah.
And it's this kind of just frustration with like, oh, young people don't care about the sort of decorum of whatever. So I think to him it was more of a problem of like, you're going to take my daughter somewhere else? People don't do that. All right, well, guess that's what you're going to do though.
Right, exactly.
It just doesn't, I don't know. I just can't tell what Will Palmer cares about.
I just chalk this up to being as simple as like he doesn't want to see his daughter leave and go far away. But yeah. It seems like they have this conversation, and then we cut to the end of the episode 14 months later. We're now in November of 1921, the Roaring Twenties. And Will wakes up in the middle of the night because he's anxious that Simon and Bertha haven't written to him in a couple months. Why would a newly married couple be busy and the first couple of years of marriage? Who could say? I don't know. it's like 3 a.m. and they knock on the door and they're like, "What is that?" And it turns out it's Bertha and Simon, and they brought a young new baby by to say hello. It's Alexander Murray Palmer Haley, everyone. That's the guy who wrote the book. It's nice. It must be so weird to be like, yeah, that baby's gonna be me. I think you guys cast that baby really good. And like, what's that baby doing today? How old is that? The baby's probably in his 30s. It's such a weird thing.
That's funny.
And then it always weirds me out a little bit that it has to be the male who does the Roots thing, especially when the like legacy of Kunta Kinte is coming down to women very often. Like Bertha is the one who's down from that side of the family, but it's Will Palmer, her father, who goes and takes him out, and his wife is like, yeah, it's a family thing, and then he does the Roots thing where he holds the baby up to the sky, and it's Alex Haley, the guy who wrote the book.
I guess supposedly Kizzy does it for George. But we just didn't see it.
But we don't see it.
Yeah,
that's weird. Neither here nor there, though. I'm really, really legitimate. Well, so, okay, what I know, because I actually caught a little bit of the preview of the next one, is we're not going right into Alex Haley's life. We're going into, like, adult Simon and Bertha.
Heck yeah.
Which I'm actually super hyped for, like, into into World War II and stuff. Oh, baby. And then also, yeah, once we get into it, what does the Alex Haley storyline even look like? Oh, I'm excited. It's going to be so strange. But cool. This is actually the time in American history that I'm a little bit more familiar with from my reading.
There's in the preview, it's like, I don't care. There aren't enough. I'm gonna change the words here. It's like there aren't enough Jewish people and black people in the whole country to get that guy's wheelchair into the White House. And then Will Palmer's like, you're talking about Mr. Roosevelt. Or sorry, not Will Palmer. Simon Haley's like, Roosevelt.
Get hype, guys.
We're gonna get some more of that stuff.
Did you want to shout out your favorite president of all time, Woodrow Wilson, by the way, who was president during?
Oh, I forgot to address it, but I think that the first episode does a really good job, actually, of introducing us to Woodrow Wilson through the eyes of these really racist Southern white guys.
Yes.
And they're like, ugh, did you hear the president's from New Jersey? And like one of the last things that what's his face, Henry Fonda's character says is like, he's from Virginia. He's like dying in the back seat, and he's like, he's from Virginia.
Dead. And he's like, he's getting black people on his cabinet. This guy sucks.
Well, no, he's not. What
am I thinking of?
What they talk about is that Woodrow Wilson passes a few executive orders to segregate different parts of the federal government. So he like segregates the post office. He's a horrible rip-roaring racist. He is very pro-segregationist, and it's bad. Yeah.
I mean, hey man, Donald Trump's our first ever racist president.
God, Joe Biden, come on,
Joe,
dude.
Stop, quit it.
Joe, buddy.
Just stop.
Yeah, I've given a little. I just find Woodrow Wilson really interesting as a sort of failure story, or a case in like a man who was ostensibly brilliant, but like actually really troubled and problematic and mediocre ultimately.
Right.
Those are just characters that I find interesting. So in that sense, I'm fascinated by Wilson. And when we did Chats on 5, I told at some point the story of his stroke undoing his bid for re-election.
Yeah.
But in the context of Roots, all you need to know is that Woodrow Wilson was real racist.
Right. Well, it all depends on the context and the lens that you view it through. That's the magic of doing different seasons of our show, is we can come back to different aspects of history and be like, actually,
yeah.
Like if we ever did commentary chats on 1917, we could be like, oh my God, World War I was so beautiful. But it's not. I mean, you chat some 1917, like that movie.
It's a good film.
For, it's taking its lenses on a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
On the British side, right?
Yeah, they're British.
Interesting stuff. But yeah, I'm really, really curious to see what's up with Alex Haley. But before you give me what's going to happen, you tell me what's going to happen next time on RootsChatz, Can you read me this this little piece of writing that you wrote in my notes?
Oh, no.
You thought I was going to let you off the hook, mister.
Alan and I have a shared Google Doc where we write notes about the episodes when we watch them. And I don't know why.
No, you know what it is? I wrote Garbo because I like to start a bullet point just to keep the bullets going.
Yeah.
So I wrote the word Garbo, Garbo, and then Magellan, when I was gone.
But it's like something we say, like, hey, Garbo. Or,
Garbo.
I don't really know why, where it came from.
But then I was like, garbage.
But then I was like, okay, Garbo. So I just wrote the line, first name Greta, last name Garbo. And then I was like, what if I just write a little rap based on the word Garbo and that rhyme scheme? So this is my rap. I'm not gonna rap it, but
you don't want me to like put music under it?
No. But I'll read it. It goes like this. It's just 8 lines. First name Greta, last name Garbo. Thought that you were better, but your whole team Garbo. Rap game Feta got that cheddar like Ricardo. Ricky Never Letter got the hijinks embargo. Gucci slippers leather and my best friend Margot. Robbie shit together like we coming out of Fargo. Got that form letter sorrow. Better off tomorrow. Art school deader, my better Leonardo. So, thank you.
Honestly, flames.
Thank you. So that's my rap.
Thank you, John. Do you want to read me what we're watching next week?
If someone wants to produce me a beat, I'll rap over it. But I only rap for the right beat.
But I'm not a rapper.
You want me to read what's happening next time?
Please.
Okay, we'll do. Okay, next week we are watching the next 2 episodes of Roots: The Next Generations, parts 5 and 6. First, part 5. 12-year-old Alex Haley learns his family history from his grandfather, Will Palmer.
Oh, Alex.
Then, we also saw in this episode Alex Haley's paternal grandmother, Queen, who there's a whole different movie about her.
Oh, yeah. And they're like, wait, Queen? And she's like, yeah, Queen Victoria. And they're like, wait, Victoria? And she's like, yes, Queen Victoria. That's me.
He ends up writing Queen in the 90s, like the early 90s.
Oh, I didn't know that was her.
And then they make a movie out of it, yeah.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Then we're watching part 6. Alex Haley joins the Coast Guard after leaving college.
Ooh.
He meets and marries Nan Branch before being sent to the South Pacific during World War II.
Ah, shit, dude.
Yeah.
They got another one of those? They keep making them.
They're doing another war. It's wacky.
Damn. Well.
Did you know Halle Berry is in Alex Haley's Queen?
What? Oh, because the 90s, sure.
It's not a movie. It's a 3-part 90s miniseries. Should we do this too?
Oh, no.
No. That's so much.
So much Roots. I feel like I'm rootsing out.
Yeah.
But it definitely sounds interesting. And I have it. So maybe I'll check it out. Cool. Well, that's what we got for this week, folks. We're going to take it to the plug zone now. This is where we plug our stuff. So please stick around because we have a lot of content that we produce for you. If you would like to comment, send us emails, questions, concerns, the recipes, pictures of your best friend, pictures of your dog, pictures of how you're having fun in quarantine. Our email address is chatzpod@gmail.com. And we also have a Twitter, which is @chatzpod. All instances of chatzpod are CHATZPOD. We also have a wonderful community-run subreddit over at reddit.com/r/chatspod, where folks are listening back to old Chats episodes, and it's a wonderful time, and you should check it out. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts, however many stars you think we're worth, or your podcast platform of choice, regardless. Just give us reviews. That's how the algorithm finds us. And finally, we have Patreon, which is where you can support us financially. That's patreon.com/chatspod. And over there, we have different tiers up to $5 a month that get you different levels of content, like movie commentaries, hangout podcasts, behind-the-scenes stuff, and Pilot Chats, a separate show where we pilot different TV shows and determine if they're going to make good chat seasons. It's a lot of fun stuff, and all of it can be found over at patreon.com/chatspod. Before we say goodbye, we like to do this little segment called Chatsums, where John and I recommend things for you to do, watch, experience, enjoy, think about, whatever. And I want to know, John, what is your Chatsum for this week?
I have a couple. I have something that is a re-chatsum, and then I have something that I thought I chatsumed a while ago, but I never did. So it's sort of a weird pairing. I'll do the one that I thought I did a while ago, but never did first. I feel like I've brought this game up before. I'm not sure, but I've been pretty frequently lately playing this card game with my roommate Charlie called Yomi, and it's a card game that is meant to mimic a fighting video game. So there's a set of decks, and they're like standard 52 card decks that are sort of built around different characters, and the core mechanic is that there's a rock paper scissors relationship between the moves that you can do, and you sort of put down a move and flip it over, and it's partly about reading your opponent and psyching each other out and doing combos and special powers and stuff, and it's pretty fun. So if you're looking for like kind of, I think, strategy heavy but like quick 2-player card game experience, Yomi is a great option for that. So I'd recommend it. The thing that I want to re-chat some, because it's relevant to what was covered in this episode of Roots: The Next Generations, is a book called 1919 by Evel Ewing. I'd have to double check to see when I initially chatsomed it, but it is essentially a book of poetry that what Evel Ewing did is she found this report that was written by the city of Chicago following the riot that was there during the Red Summer, where they kind of do this like post-mortem, okay, what happened? Why did it happen? What could we do to prevent something like this from happening again? And then she takes snippets from that report and uses those snippets to inspire poems. And the book is told in 3 parts. The first section is essentially the telling of the Great Migration and why African American people are coming to cities like Chicago in the first place. The second section is poems about the events of that riot and the Red Summer itself. And then the third section is about the sort of long-term aftermath and the echoes of that event across American history in the years to follow. It came out a year ago because last year was the 100-year anniversary, 2019, of the Red Summer. But it showed up in this episode, so I thought it was a good time to remind people that that's a great thing to check out.
Interesting fun fact. Chatsalon 5 episode 46 is when you chatsomed 1919 by Evel Ewing.
I just looked at it. I also chatsomed
Phenyl. But what's interesting is it shows how far we've come. That was it's almost a year ago to the day, July 28th, 2019. Is when
oh, wow. Came out. There you go.
So we were, almost exactly a year later, you found the same chatsum to be valuable. And I love it. I still need to check that out. I'm frustrated to say that I haven't checked it out yet. It's been a whole year, but maybe this will be the motivator.
I lent it to one of my students, and then COVID happened.
Oh, right.
Like, well, I would still like a copy of this book, so I just recently bought another copy of it.
I might just buy one, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's worth owning.
Cool. Well, my chatsum this week is more just a podcast that I found really engaging this past week. So Crunchyroll, the sort of like premier anime streaming service right now, and this is not an ad, obviously, they've started producing a podcast that's kind of like, I don't know that many documentary podcasts, to be honest with you, but this podcast is called Anime in America, and I think it's going to be weekly. It's going to go for about 6 episodes, and it's hosted by anime critic Yadoye Travis, who's also a wonderful comedian that I'm a big fan of. Formerly of Get in the Robot, which is now a defunct YouTube channel that I think I've chatsomed before. But Anime in America is a 30-minute each episode little documentary about the history of anime coming to America, because obviously it's been around for much longer, but kind of starting in the late 80s and talking like the first episode is a whole bit about fan subbing and the process of like taking different VHSs and daisy chaining VHSs to record and hard code subtitles onto different anime tapes and then distributing those for free because they didn't want to like illegally sell anime to people. It's really, really well researched and it's very well produced. I think it's like they managed to be funny but also like put the nice music under it, and it just flows really well. So like as a podcast producer, I think it's really great, and I'm curious to see what other aspects of that history they cover, because you know, we think of anime as like it's something that's always been accessible to everyone since the beginning of time, but in reality it's like its history is much more recent and was complicated for a while. The second episode, I'm just going to say, talks more than a little bit about Silvio Berlusconi. So just let you chew on that. And again, that podcast is called Anime in America. So that's what we got, folks. Thanks both to Magellan for being the rock to my hard place. As always, I couldn't ask for a better co-host in life. And thank you, dear listener, for listening and hopefully enjoying this episode of RootsChatz. Peace.